The American Academy of Orthopedic Surgeons.
Hello, Gary Stearman. Time for another edition of Prophecy in the News. Today's guest came to us in 2008, right here at Prophecy in the News, and he shared with us something amazing. His name is Mark Biltz. He's back again to go even further than he did the first time, and we'll be right back. Well, Mark Biltz, welcome once again to Prophecy in the News.
Thank you, Gary. It's great to be here.
Now, when you were with us here in 2008, and of course J.R. Church was still with us at that time, you shared with us something that absolutely blew us away. And I would like for you to kind of review what you told us at that time, and then let's get into some even deeper analysis of what you've discovered.
Sure, I'd love to, Gary. What amazes me was back in March of 2008, I saw this total lunar eclipse over the Temple Mount. And I was praying about this, and, you know, as you're very well aware of all the prophecies, you know, about signs in the heavens and the sun turning to darkness and the moon to blood. And so as I was looking this, I went to NASA's website because they have 5,000 years of eclipses recorded. Because God created everything mathematically, they can do this.
Right.
Well, I noticed that there were 4 total blood moons or total lunar eclipses in a row in 2014 and 2015. And I saw it was like April and September or April and October. And all of a sudden, it's like the Lord told me, you need to put this on the biblical calendar. And so I did, and lo and behold, they fell on Passover and the Feast of Tabernacles in 2014, and then again on Passover and Tabernacles in 2015. I was blown away to see these 4 blood moons falling on the feast days, and I wondered how often does that happen? And I noticed it didn't happen at all in the 1800s, the 1700s, the 1600s. And so I went to the 1900s, and lo and behold, twice there were 4 blood moons in a row. And guess what years they fell? This is what we talked about, 1967 and 68 when Israel captured Jerusalem. And then right after Israel became a nation in 1948, they happened in 1949 and 1950. And so I thought this is an awesome sign. I mean, in Genesis 1:14, God said he created the sun, the moon, and the stars to send signs.
Now, there we were in 2008, and we were listening to Mark tell us about this. And by the way, we were very excited, looking forward to 2014. And at that time, 2014 was quite a while away. It was in the future. Now we're almost there. And in the interim, in the last 6 years, about the last 5 years plus, you've done a lot more study. You have refined your studies a great deal, and you've produced some materials, which, by the way, we're going to talk about a little bit later, because Mark has a lot he wants to share with you in those materials. But I can't wait to get into maybe the nuts and bolts, the details of what, the implications of what you have discovered. It is phenomenal to me. It all rotates around Israel, the regathered Israel, the key dates surrounding Israel's formation in the 20th and 21st centuries, the wars of modern Israel. All of these things seem to just fit together like gears in a machine. It's amazing. Yeah,
you're totally right, Gary. And I think as long as we realize that Israel is God's prophetic timepiece or time clock, we'll have the right perspective. I really believe that we need to get back on the biblical calendar to realize where we're at prophetically.
There's a famous verse of Scripture. I want to get things started here with Joel 2:31. And I know all of you out there are watching. If you've picked up the Bible at all, you have probably seen this little verse I'm going to read. The sun shall be turned to darkness, the moon into blood, before the great and terrible day of the Lord come. Very simple statement. Has to do with the sun and the moon before God's judgment falls on planet Earth. Well, that's very interesting to any student of Bible prophecy. You have put detail in this. You have made us all stop and think, Mark, and that's what we're going to do today.
Well, I'm really excited to do that because, as you said, not only are there 4 blood moons falling on these feast days, Passover and Tabernacles, 2 years in a row, there are also total solar eclipses and partial solar eclipses that are falling like on Rosh Hashanah in 2015, as well as Nisan 1, the first day of the biblical calendar. This is the day when the fire fell and lit the Moses tabernacle at the grand opening ceremony.
Well, you know, the term blood moon, I can remember maybe 30, 40, 50 years ago hearing the term blood moon, and this is before I had ever seen an eclipse or noticed it. I have since become very interested in astronomy, but when I'll never forget when I saw my first total eclipse. The color of the moon really is a lot like blood. It's a strange red, a darkish orange, scarlet, almost indescribable. And so when the prophets use the term blood moon, or the moon shall turn to blood, it's not an inscrutable thing at all. It's a common occurrence.
Yes, God often uses common occurrences. And to me, it's the timing that is so amazing, because you can only have a total solar eclipse on the first day of a biblical month. You can only have a total lunar eclipse on the 15th day of a biblical month. So that's why God created the sun and the moon to send signals on his feast days, because that's when the feast days fall. Passover is in the middle of the month. Tabernacles in the middle of the month. Rosh Hashanah is on the first of the month. So it's almost like God had this planned.
Yeah, this is fascinating. Now, stay with us, because this is going to get a whole lot more interesting. As you began to notice this phenomenon, let's now go into the solar and lunar cycles. There is a cycle that you looked at when you looked back at the history of solar and lunar eclipses. Tell us about that.
Well, I noticed that not only were these TETRAD. Now, TETRAD is 4 total blood moons in a row. You can have a lot of eclipses, okay, which are very significant if they fall on the feast days.
Yeah.
But I found clear back in 70 A.D., at the destruction of the temple, there were eclipses on the Jewish holidays, the biblical holidays, all around the destruction of the temple. And in 32 and 33 A.D., right around the death of Messiah, there were eclipses. All around that time frame on the Jewish holidays or the biblical feast days. I even went to 1492 when Columbus sailed the ocean blue. And in 1493 and 1494, there were 4 blood moons on Passover and Tabernacles 2 years in a row. And so I see this cycle where God is pinpointing significant events.
But not just events, but rather events in the life of Israel.
Exactly.
It's centered around the Jewish calendar and the events that bring Israel to another stage of prophetic development, shall we say. Well, this coming series of eclipses, both solar and lunar, that you're looking at now, and by the way, you've documented them. I think you've probably gone into more depth than anybody else. And I want to just say right up front, I congratulate you on the detail of your observations, because it's possible to kind of gloss over a few of these details. But in your studies, you've really gone into some depth and detail about how these things are going to happen.
Yes, and it's amazing to me, Gary. One of the most exciting things was, I don't know, I believe you're familiar with the super moon.
Yeah.
The super moon is when the moon, in its going around the Earth once a month, when it's at its closest point. Okay, if there's a full moon, it's called a super moon. So think about the odds of this. I know you love math as well as astronomy. You have to look at what are the odds of there being a full moon when it's at perigee, or the closest point to Earth. Then you have to look at what are the odds of this full moon also being a total lunar eclipse, okay, at its closest point.
Right.
It's a supermoon. Then you have to consider what are the chances not only of having a full moon when it's at perigee, having a total blood moon, but also having it being seen in Israel. This is increasing the odds.
Because not all eclipses are seen all around the world. They're seen on one side of the world.
Exactly. And then there's more. Not only in 2015, on the Feast of Tabernacles, when all the Jews are outside in their sukkahs where they can look up and see the stars, you not only have a total moon, okay, it is a total blood moon at perigee, so it looks 20% larger, and it falls on the Feast of Tabernacles.
In
and
what
it's
year?
seen in Israel, 2015.
2015.
So here you have a super blood moon on the Feast of Tabernacles seen in Jerusalem in 2015.
Now, let's back up from 2015, because before that, you've got another series of eclipses that lead up to that incredible event.
Yes, in 2014, there's a total lunar eclipse on Passover, and then there's a total lunar eclipse on the Feast of Tabernacles. Following, on Nisan 1 of 2015, there's a total solar eclipse beginning the religious calendar year. 2 weeks later, you have the total blood moon on Passover, followed by another solar eclipse on Rosh Hashanah, followed by the super blood moon seen in Jerusalem as the grand finale in 2015.
Wow. Now, for those of you who don't follow the Jewish calendar and are not familiar with the feasts of Israel, there are 7 basic feasts of Israel, beginning with Passover, ending with Sukkot, or Tabernacles. And if you will, this procession of feasts, the feasts of Israel, are very meaningful. They're very symbolic, but they're also linked to heavenly events. Now, wait a minute. This must mean that God has a plan.
You think?
I think.
Yeah, you know. Well, the amazing thing to me, and this is what is so important, is when we realize that the feasts of the Lord, first off, it doesn't say the feast of Israel, it says the feast of the Lord. And so if you belong to the Lord, these feasts belong to you. And this word feast really means, as we said, divine appointment. When you think about it, Jesus died on Passover. He didn't die 6 months before or 6 months after. He was buried on the Feast of Unleavened Bread. He rose on the Feast of First Fruits. Pentecost happened on the Feast of Pentecost. Many Christians don't know that Jews have been keeping Pentecost for 1,500 years before Pentecost.
Absolutely.
And so think about it. Do you believe the Lord is the same yesterday, today, and forever?
I do.
If he fulfilled the spring feast to the day of his first coming, he will fulfill the fall feast to the day of his second coming. This word feast implies God has a day timer. And then he created the sun and the moon and the stars to coincide with his day timer to send us signals of prophetic events that are coming. Now, NASA says there's been 12,000 lunar eclipses over the last 5,000 years. But only 28% were total lunar eclipses, okay? But of that, even fewer do you have 4 total lunar eclipses back to back. There's only been 8 times in the last 2,000 years that this has happened. So for God to put these lunar eclipses on his feast days back to back, I really believe there's signals to his body that prophetic times are right ahead.
You know, we should be aware, according to Scripture, of the times and the seasons, without a doubt. You know, some people would say, don't waste your time looking for signs. And you've probably heard people say that.
Sure.
Because nobody knows the day or the hour. But on the other hand, why should we be looking for times and seasons?
Well, I think because Jesus said so. Jesus rebuked the Pharisees because they didn't know the times and the seasons. And so we're called to be watchmen. Now, one thing that's important to realize, Gary, is I'm not setting dates. I don't control the biblical calendar. I don't control an eclipse. All I'm saying is, as a watchman, God, look at the pattern of what has happened in 67 and 68. Look what's happened in 49 and 50.
Yeah, and look what happened all the way back to 1492. And every time that this pattern emerges, something fascinating happens to Israel.
Exactly.
It's linked to Israel.
It totally is. And I think the church needs to be aware of that. Because if we want to understand biblical prophecy, we have to realize God is not going to use the Roman calendar.
Well, you know, as a Christian, Mark, I go back to the 19th century. There were a group of men who began to study the Bible at that time, and they said Israel is going to return to the land. And a lot of people called them crazy.
Yes.
But Israel did return. In 1897, the First Zionist Congress, 1947-48, Israel's UN recognition, statehood, and then 67 and coming on up to the present. And many of us have gotten on board, and we're watching Israel very, very carefully, but you've sort of taken it a step further with this presentation. By the way, I want to say that we are not going to have time enough on this 30-minute broadcast today to tell you everything Mark has discovered. We are going to be able to offer you some study aids that he has made available. But if you really want to meet Mark and hear him talk, you ought to be with us in Orlando on March 28th of this year at the Orlando Prophecy Conference. You're going to be there, right?
Oh, you bet I'm going to be there. I was there in Colorado, and I'm really looking forward to be there in Orlando. As a matter of fact, I've already got my airline ticket.
Aha. And by the way, that's getting really close to what we're talking about today. That date, March 28th, is moving right toward the time.
Yeah, not only that, it is just a few weeks before the first blood moon on Passover next year.
Hey, you need to find out about the March 28th Orlando Prophecy Summit. Gary Stearman with a word about the upcoming Orlando Prophecy Summit, March 28th through 30th. It's going to be fabulous, Bob.
It's going to be the Prophecy Conference for the Ages. 24 speakers in sunny Orlando, Florida. The sunshine, the beaches, Disney World, Universal Studios, the Holy Land theme park, and 24 incredible speakers.
Like Chuck Missler, Bill Salas, L.A. Marzulli, and, by the way, Mark Biltz.
Don't forget Mark Biltz. 2 weeks before the blood moons hit Israel, Mark Biltz is going to be speaking at our conference. L.A. Marzulli, fresh off his trip to Peru, his hunt for the skulls and the skeletons of the Nephilim. It's going to be fabulous.
Bob, for our viewers in the southeastern United States, this is a one-day drive to a beautiful hotel, and we're going to have the most fabulous get-together you can possibly imagine. Be with us. Call the 800 number right now, 1-800-475-1111. We'll see you there. Well, Mark, continuing on, where should we go from here? I know you got a lot of facts and figures in front of you there that you would like to lay out for people today. What's the most important thing people can take away from this discussion?
I think the most important thing is what you and I were talking about right before we came on, and that is the importance of the biblical calendar. In Zechariah 8:19, for an example, God says there are 4 fast days on the biblical calendar that are going to be turned into feast days. But if we don't know where those fall on our Gregorian calendar, as prophecy students, we will never know when it happened. So we produced a calendar that not only has all of the signs in the heavens on the calendar, it overlays the Gregorian calendar with the biblical calendar. So you can see exactly where you are prophetically and look at the events. So you will know when the 9th of Av falls every year.
And by the way, that's very important. You know, for your daily comings and goings, you're going to keep a normal Gregorian calendar, just the one we're all familiar with. We all grew up with it. But if you overlay the Jewish calendar upon that, suddenly a new dimension appears. And the plan of God doesn't follow the Gregorian calendar.
You are so right. This calendar is like 3-dimensional. Because the spies, remember the 10 spies that brought the bad report to Joshua and Caleb? That happened on the 9th day of the month of Av. Now let's say the 9th of August, just for those that only know the Gregorian calendar. Well, that day became cursed throughout Jewish history. When Nebuchadnezzar destroyed the temple in 587 BC, it happened on the 9th of Av. When Rome destroyed the temple in 70 AD, it happened on the 9th of Av. Okay? In 1290, all the Jews were expelled out of England on the 9th of Av. 1492, all the Jews were expelled from Spain on the 9th of Av. Wow. World War I started on the 9th of Av. Hitler's proclamation to kill the Jews was on the 9th of Av. And then in 2005, when they evacuated the Gaza Strip, it was at sunset on the 9th of Av, the same day they rejected the land,
wow.
You know, a lot earlier. So, but you don't see, unless you know when the 9th of Av falls, you don't see the prophetic connection. Even the Lebanon War in 2007 started on the 17th of Tammuz, which was the same year they worshipped the golden, or the same day they worshipped the golden calf.
Isn't it amazing how that works? And once your eyes are open to this fact, suddenly a whole new world emerges. Think about what we read in the Bible about the desecration of the temple.
Yes.
In the days of the Maccabees, you know,
yes,
and Antiochus IV Epiphanes, you know, and he was overthrown, and the temple was rededicated on the 24th of Kislev.
Right.
And when General Allenby took Jerusalem, it was in 1917 on the 24th of Kislev. And then when the Temple Mount was regained in 1967. It's just amazing how these things work.
As a matter of fact, when you read Genesis and the story of Noah and the flood, the rain stopped and the rainbow appeared during Hanukkah, right in the middle of Hanukkah. But unless you're on the biblical calendar, you aren't aware of these things. So in the calendar that we produce, we not only have all the eclipses, we have significant happenings on the feast days and every other day of the year. For example, when Moses died or whatever, so people can be aware.
Yeah, Mark is proceeding on the basis now that we have a sort of a new consciousness or a renewed consciousness of God's plan, giving a new meaning to the phrase times and seasons. And it's really that simple.
Yes.
It just suddenly, it's like having your mind opened up to something that's been hidden away for a long time.
Well, you're so right, Gary, because God in Acts 3:19 through 22, it talks about how Jesus is going to be stayed in heaven until the restoration of all things. And one of those things, I believe, is the biblical calendar.
Well, let's go into a little more detail now, because you've got some facts and figures in front of you on the table there that you wanted to share with people concerning, I guess, the length of time and the build-up or the development of this whole pattern up to the present day.
Yes, and again, these are not theories; these are facts.
Okay.
And you can go to NASA's website.
And by the way, what Mark's about to say is very important. He is not guessing here. He's not just making things up out of his head. He's looking at astronomical events that are timed, they are accurate. People who don't even believe in the Bible are the people who observe all this.
Exactly. And so I like to use science. I like to use math. These aren't theories. These aren't me guessing at something. And people, the nice thing is everything is backed up. You can go right to NASA's website and see all of these things. But NASA records how there, as far as lunar eclipses, there's been about 12,000 over the last 5,000 years. Solar eclipses, there's been around 12,000. But of these 12,000 lunar eclipses, now some are total, some are partial, and then some are penumbral is what they're called. But only 29% of the time have they been total lunar eclipses. Okay? So it's really important to, typically you only have one total lunar eclipse every few years. But to have 4 together in 2 years, tied to the biblical holidays, that's huge.
It's uncanny is what it is, because when you look at the calendar, and by the way, let me just pull this calendar up here from El Shaddai Ministries, and we're going to offer this to you in a minute. This calendar, when you look at it, you actually can see a picture of a blood moon that is a totally eclipsed moon on a particular date. In fact, you see the Gentile calendar, the Gregorian calendar date, and then you see the Hebrew or the Jewish calendar date superimposed on that same event. But wait a minute, we're leaving something out here, because to put these events into a pattern of the Jewish festivals, in my opinion, Mark, throws the burden of all of this back toward Israel. It's as though God is saying, I am turning back to my people Israel, and here are the signs that I'm putting up to prove it. Now, I don't want to go too far, but what does this mean?
Well, I think it's very important for us to realize something. If you remember during the story of Joseph told Jacob, his mom was dead, but told his father Jacob and his other brothers that he had this dream of the sun and the moon and the stars bowing down to him. And Jacob said, well, I and your mother and your 11 brothers bow down to you. So we see that Israel was equated to the sun, the moon, and the stars. Well, we know in Genesis 1:14, God created the sun, the moon, and the stars for signs and signals. Well, now we see Israel is equated to the sun, the moon, and the stars. So Israel also as a nation was created as a sign to send us signals of what God is doing. So that's why we need to look back to Israel, because they were created as signs.
What we have in the Middle East today, just a little departure, what we have is a time bomb, I think.
A literally time bomb.
We're talking about times and seasons. We have a time bomb. We have so many lines of force developing in the Middle East right now. And I think we're literally at a crossroads. Something has to happen. Now, if I look ahead, and I'm not going to try to predict the future, but we're going into these remarkable 2 years of signs, it would seem that that might be the time when something would happen to Israel, as it has done in the past.
You are so right. And the key is to look at the patterns. Again, like you, I'm not predicting, but we can look at the pattern, look at science, just like detectives look at a pattern. What do we see? In 1948, you have a biblically prophetic war take place, and then you have the blood moons. In 1967, another biblically prophetic war takes place with Israel. So I believe 2014, 2015, and we look what's happening in Syria and with Iran, there's a good possibility you could see another major biblically prophetic war take place over the next 2 years.
I think you're right. Now, let me just stop right here and tell you that Mark has brought with him today something that he wants you to have. Here is a book that he's produced called The Feast of the Lords. It has an accompanying DVD set, 5 DVDs, in which he goes into great depth and detail talking about the things that he has really only hinted at today, because there's much more than we can talk about on a 30-minute program. And by the way, on the DVDs, you will discover PowerPoint presentations so that you'll be able to see diagrams, you'll be able to see pictures, you'll be able to see charts that show you in an understandable way what the numerical relationships are. And so the book and the DVD set, accompanied by the calendar we referred to a minute ago, and this calendar is called, is from El Shaddai Ministries. It is for 2013, 2014. It shows the Jewish calendar. It shows the
signs in the
blood
heavens.
moons right on the calendar. When you look at a particular date, you'll be able to see a picture of what's going on at that time. And by the way, you'll be interested, I guarantee you. And we are presenting this to you along with a bonus DVD. Mark Biltz spoke at the Pikes Peak Prophecy Summit, and at absolutely no charge to you, we're going to throw in this bonus DVD. When you order what we're calling the Blood Moon Package, the Feast of the Lord DVD and book and the Blood Moon calendar, yours for $49.95 plus shipping and handling. The bonus DVD comes from Mark's presentation. By the way, it was a winner. Heard a lot of feedback from that back in July at the Pikes Peak Prophecy Summit. Mark, phenomenal times we're living in. I appreciate your being here. A few years later, after 2008, you've discovered so much more, and you're still going into more work now.
And I'm looking forward to the conference in Orlando.
I am too. And by the way, when you hear Mark in person, when you talk to him in person, he's just a veritable fountain of information about this. I think he is the expert. Listen, you got to come back and talk to us again soon.
I will.
Mark Biltz. I'm Gary Stearman. And to the rest of you, I would wish you a great day in the Lord. Keep watching, by the way. Things are happening. Keep looking up. Prophecy in the News is a viewer-supported program made possible by our many friends around the world. Be sure you tune in every day for breaking news and our daily prophetic news updates at prophecyinthenews.com, or follow us on Facebook at facebook.com/prophecyinthenews.